let's take a closer look at Essay 2. It's a little more challenging than your first essay assignment. In your first essay, you were focusing on yourself in part, and in this essay, you're actually being asked to analyze, to evaluate the work of someone else. So in this second essay, you're evaluating an article, an opinion piece that describes the effects of a law. And all of the articles I've offered you share these things in common. They are opinion pieces, and they're focusing on the effects of some legislation. So how do you approach this assignment? First step, identify each effect listed by the author, and then you look for the evidence provided by the author to support the claim, to support this argument that this effect will result from the law. You want to determine whether there are other effects the author overlooks. And finally, determine whether the logic is valid or whether there are fallacies. So, what are fallacies? Fallacies, here's a definition, an argument whose premises fail to support the conclusion. So, premises fail to support the conclusion. Now, I'll give you two examples here, one of an argument where the premises support the conclusion and one where they don't. So, this is Aristotle's famous syllogism. Aristotle is a man, that's the first premise. All men are mortal, that's the second premise. So what is the conclusion? Therefore, Aristotle is mortal. So the first premise is true, the second premise is true, and both of them work together to produce this conclusion. Therefore, Aristotle is mortal. Now, let's look at some logic that isn't valid. So here's this little cartoon. Penguins are black and white. Some old TV shows are black and white. Therefore, some penguins are old TV shows. So I guess this penguin, logic isn't his strong suits. Now, we see fallacies frequently. Why? They offer shortcuts, and our brains would rather use less energy and find a quicker response to something. I love this meme. I don't always know what I'm talking about, but when I do, I learned it from a small sample of anecdotal evidence. So it's easier to form an opinion based on one piece of evidence than it is to go and research and find other evidence. Whereas that might give you a very different result than concluding something based on one piece of evidence. Okay, so let's go back to Essay 2. So in Essay 2, once again, I'm asking you to evaluate someone's argument. And to do that, you need to look at the cause-effect relationships in the article and question whether the reasoning is valid. So let's look at that example article we discussed in class. This was Alicia Finley of the Wall Street Journal. So her argument was that banning single-use plastic bags would have all kinds of bad effects. It would cause an increase in foodborne illnesses, increase in oil imports, in pollution, in unemployment, and it would have just a small effect on litter. So it would just decrease litter by 1% is what she maintained. So let's look at these a little more closely, which is what I want you to do with your articles. So with this relationship, banning single-use plastic bags was followed by a rise in foodborne illnesses. Now, that might be true, but is one connected, caused by the other? So this is a fallacy. The Latin term for it is post hoc ergo propter hoc, and that just means after this, because of this. But that's not necessarily the case. You know, it's like a lot of people think that they get these side effects from vaccines, or not, I beg your pardon, not side effects, that they get these illnesses from vaccines. But just because you got the vaccine before you got the illness doesn't necessarily mean one caused the other. And the thing to remember is that correlation does not equal causation. So just because you have a connection doesn't mean that one caused the other. So let's look at another causal relationship Fenley proposes, that there will be an increase in both pollution worldwide as well as oil imports. Well, what I would recommend doing with that claim is to check and see if there are recent studies about the amount of bags used since the ban. You could also look into other claims she makes on this point, is whether it's clear that the recyclable bags actually do use so much more oil that needs to be imported from other countries. So another claim she makes is she proposes that the single-use plastic bags will lead to an increase in unemployment. Why? Because people will go to places where you're not charged for bags. Well, the argument may be irrelevant just because are you really going to drive to Oregon or Portland to save 10 cents on a bag? This is now a statewide ban. At one point, it had been a county thing, and I think I mentioned to you in class that a couple of years ago, single-use bags were banned in Sacramento, but not in West Sacramento. Well, again, does this mean you're going to drive, to another county just to save 10 cents, whereas the gas might be way more expensive than that? Okay, she also says that banning single-use plastic bags will only lead to a small decrease in litter. But what's the matter with that? I mean, I'll take that, right? So a 1% decrease in litter, might be a good thing, assuming that not other pollution is generated. Something else to keep in mind here is the author of that example essay I gave you maintained that Fenley was cherry-picking her data here. In other words, she was overlooking other studies that indicated that single-use plastic bags really had a bad effect, like on beaches and aquatic life. This idea of cherry-picking is important, just because so many authors, when they are trying to convince you of something, will look for data that supports their point, even if they have to overlook other data that might challenge their argument. So the cherry-picking fallacy, which is also known as the card-stacking fallacy, with that, the author only uses the data that supports the claim, overlooks other data that might refute it. You can look at this little comic strip here. We surveyed our study participants, and 100% of the 4 people felt better. And that may be a very true comment, but what about the 96 participants who left after the first week? So you're overlooking a key point here. Okay, so just to recap, your goal in this essay is to critique an author's argument. Okay, now let's talk about bias for a second. As these authors are all writing opinion pieces, they are biased. By definition, an opinion piece will reveal a bias. When you critique it, your job is to stay free of bias. In other words, your opinion on the topic doesn't matter. What you're doing is you're just analyzing someone else's work to see if their opinion can be supported, if their claim can be supported. So you're not letting your reader know what you think about the topic. Instead, you're looking for shortcomings in someone else's reasoning. All right, there you have it. Thanks for watching.